Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar on personalized learning plans. My name is Jonah and I'm the Manager of Inclusive Education with the New Brunswick Association for Community Living. Today we're going to look at what is a personalized learning plan and what kinds there are, and what are some of the key points that you should keep in mind when your son or daughter has a personalized learning plan while at school. All right, so what is a PLP? So a PLP is a plan that has adjustments that were recommended for education goals and programs. So these adjustments have been recommended by educational professionals such as classroom teachers, it could be SLPs, resource teachers, etc. It identifies supports and services that help the student to learn and achieve to his fullest potential. It involves modifications and individualizations, so it depends on the child and it's developed specifically for one particular child. So it really is about what does this individual child require in order to learn. It's developed by a team of people, so it should not be something that is developed by one person. It should be really a team effort, and you should be part of that team as well. It should keep inclusion in mind, so wherever possible that we ensure that we have inclusive education goals, that we're not focusing on removing a student from the classroom. And it's reviewed frequently and evaluated yearly. So it's really important that when we have a PLP that we don't start it in September and then we look at it again in June. We really need to make sure that it's a living document that we're reviewing on a continual basis. And our goals are designed in a way that we can check up in a month or two to see how the progress has been made. So when should you consider a PLP? So a PLP is considered when student is experiencing difficulties over an extended period of time. So this is not just for one unit or a month. It is really over an extended period of time. We want to ensure that we're not putting students on PLPs and modifying their work if it's not necessary. So an extended period of time could be the first part of the year. So if we look from September until the second reporting periods around February, perhaps that's enough time to see if the student is having difficulty. It's important that we're not looking or focusing on one subject area specifically. Maybe a student's having a little bit more of a difficult time with English. Writing is not their forte. We wouldn't put a student on a PLP just because they're having some difficulty writing, for instance. It's also if a student is not making progress with the teacher's additional support. So if a student requires additional support, the teacher is providing that. If a student is still struggling or they're not making any progress, that's when we would consider a PLP. We also have a PLP if the student has a previously identified exceptionality and we know that it's going to cause some difficulty throughout the school year and that they will need some additional support. And that could be because they need some OT goals, some physio, some SLP goals, or it could be that we know from the start that they're going to require additional support to be successful. So how to get started. So the teacher and or parents, depending on who's noticing the difficulties, should approach the resource teacher. And the resource teacher will work in collaboration with the teacher and parents to develop the PLP. A psych ed should be requested if you're putting a student on a PLP and it's not clear where they are struggling. If you believe that your child is struggling but you can't really identify exactly where they need additional support or what level of support that they would require, an assessment could be very valuable. Interventions can and should occur even though a formal assessment has not identified an exceptionality. So if your child is waiting for a psych ed assessment, which sometimes takes a while, your child should still be receiving the intervention or support that he or she needs. So if in the psych ed, if you're waiting for the assessment and you think that your child may require keyboard for writing instead of pen and paper, we shouldn't wait till we have a psych ed assessment done. We should offer that support in the meantime. So the psych ed assessment, the school makes a referral to the district psychologist or outside professional. So the school team will meet to discuss whether or not they feel it's appropriate. If they feel that a psych ed is appropriate, they put out a referral to the district psychologist. At that point, the district psychologist may come for a consultation. They may work with the school team to determine exactly what supports the child may need, or they may decide that a full assessment is necessary. They can also refer to an outside professional, but as I'm sure you have encountered, having a psych ed done by an outside professional can be quite costly. So going through the district is much easier, although it does take quite a while. And parents can also go and find someone to do a psych ed assessment for their child if they wish. But again, this is something that you would have to pay for, and it is quite costly. So throughout the year, in order to enable the student to learn and achieve, it's important for the teacher and resource teacher to do ongoing monitoring and adjustments. So what ongoing monitoring is looking at the goals and ensuring that your child's making progress with those goals. So for instance, if your child has speech goals and they're working on sight words, and the goal is that your child will have 5 sight words, be able to recognize 5 sight words by the end of September. It's important that at the end of September that we evaluate and that we monitor where your child is in terms of those goals. It's important not to wait or make a goal too large. For instance, it's important not to put a goal that by the end of grade 2, your child will know 50 sight words without having any benchmarks before that. And then adjustments. Sometimes we put goals down, and then when we go and look at them doing our ongoing monitoring, we realize that they're really not appropriate for your child. Perhaps they're too difficult, too easy. Perhaps that's not really what the focus should be at that time. It's important that adjustments are made whenever that happens. If the school is waiting for special planning and services such as Kurzweil, FM systems, it could be a laptop, iPad, etc., the teacher should still be implementing interventions suited to the student. So if your child requires an iPad to do his or her work, it's important that in the meantime that they're making use of other assistive technology or support so that your child has the support that he or she needs. Perhaps an iPad is not available, but they can supply additional resources. They can use a computer in the meantime, whatever it is that's appropriate for your child. So from kindergarten to grade 2, the schools will offer intervention programs in addition to supports they are receiving. So the focus is really on intervention. Because it may eliminate the need for a long-term PLP. So if a child requires intervention in a certain area, perhaps it's sight words, and they receive the intervention on a regular basis, perhaps the school team is able to get them to a point where they're not going to require a PLP. So the focus from K-2 is really on intervention and ensuring that we're giving the students as many skills as possible. It's important to note that for some reason a student needs to be in an alternative setting, he or she will also require a PLP, and that's stated in policy 322. So if your child is not in the regular classroom for learning purposes, it's important that there's a PLP and that it's documented as to why that's happening and how they're going to incorporate inclusive goals at a later stage. So parent and guardian involvement. So parents, as their child's first educator, have an important role to play in the development of a PLP and will need to be there to support the student and school team. So it's important that you are sitting around the table, that you are involved, that you're asking questions, that you're contributing. So you should always be consulted when the school team is considering a diagnosis. So if the school is considering additional programming or they think something else is going on, it's important that you're part of that process. And you should also be consulted during the development of a PLP. So there is a difference between developing the PLP and being consulted in the development. So it's important that the school team is coming to you, that you're sitting around the table, that you are agreeing on the goals that are being put in the PLP, and that you may have some goals that you may want the school to work on as well, and you're more than welcome to suggest those. For instance, perhaps your child doesn't know how to use an analog clock and you feel that that's really important. That could be something that you suggest during that meeting, that they work on time. It could also be that your child excuse me, has a difficult time knowing the value of things, and you're asking them to do some work in that area. So parents can often be the first person to request an assessment or a PLP, as they will first recognize their child's struggles at home. And these are some areas that you may notice if your child is having difficulty, that something may need to be adjusted at school. So your child may want to avoid homework, and this isn't that they would prefer to play video games or do something like that, but it's really they're avoiding it and they really don't want to do their homework, and you feel that it's more than just they would prefer to do something else. Your child may avoid certain subjects. So perhaps it's time to sit down at the table and do homework. Math is fine. Your child cooperates. And then when it comes time to reading, that's when you notice that there are a lot more behaviors and that your child is really avoiding doing that. Your child may be spending a large amount of time on homework. So it's important to ask the teacher how long they expect your child to be working on homework. For instance, in grade 1, perhaps they're asking that your child spends 10 to 15 minutes on homework a night. But in reality, your child is spending upwards of 30, 40, 60 minutes on homework. It's important to relay that information to the teacher because he or she may not be aware that it's taking your child that long. And if it could be that they're giving too much homework to everyone in the class, or it could be that your child is struggling somewhere and they're spending too much time doing their homework and it needs to be adjusted. There may be patterns of behaviors concerning school. So perhaps your child feels really great on the weekend and then Monday morning comes and they consistently don't feel well, or there's more behaviors the night before school, that sort of thing. So are there any behaviors that are linked to going to school? So the importance of parent and guardian collaboration. So as a parent, you can provide background information. And this is background information from other school years that had previously gone by, how your child is in different environments, really who your child is and their backstory. And also past experiences. So if your child, if previously they had tried a certain intervention with your child and it did not go well, it's important that you share that with the school team. You don't want your child to have to go through something for the second time if it wasn't successful at first. Or you can also share if something worked really well. For instance, in grade 1, they used a token economy and it was very, very successful. In grade 2, you can suggest that perhaps that's something that they could continue. And also important, relevant, or information relevant to an exceptionality. So it's important that we provide educators with as much information about your child's exceptionality as possible, because every single child is different and every single child and educator needs to know accurate information on that exceptionality. So provide educators with as much information as you can and how it presents in your child as well. So during the process of developing a PLP for a student, parent and guardians can also provide input when establishing goals. So as I mentioned before, you could mention if a goal was very important to you, if you would like them to focus on one area or another. And you can also work on some of the goals at home. For instance, if you're working on a counting goal when you're at home on the weekend, and if you're baking cookies, you can ask your child to count out a certain amount of chocolate chips to put in the cookies. You can incorporate the goals in a fun way at home to ensure that they're practicing in all different environments. So there will be a planning meeting for the student when developing a PLP and every year afterwards, as long as your child is still on a PLP. And you should be present and collaborate with the school team during those meetings. So ideas should be shared as to what the goals are, what the progress has been, what other supports could be put in place, what are your child's strengths and interests, etc. Your child, if it's appropriate, should also be there for a portion of the time. So as a parent, you can determine with the teacher if and when it's appropriate. So some students are very uncomfortable in that setting and they don't wish to participate. Other students really would like their voice to be heard. So it's important that you talk with the teaching team to see when and for how long it may be appropriate. Perhaps your child will come in at the very beginning of the meeting and share some of the things that he or she would like to work on and then leave for the remainder of the meeting, or come in from time to time, depending on the situation. So who is involved in developing the PLP? So all of these people listed on this slide are not necessarily present during the planning meeting, but they should be consulted. So we have the School-Based Student Services team, so it's often referred to as the ESS team, and they work at the school level. And it's usually comprised of the school principal, perhaps vice principal, a resource teacher, guidance counselor, and then a teacher from either every grade level or every teaching group. So it could be a teacher from grade 1, 2, 3, for example, or it could be a teacher from the math department or the language arts department, etc. So the classroom teacher should be involved. Educational assistants, often they won't be sitting around the table, but they will often be consulted by the teaching team. And parents and guardians and students should be also involved. And your child may not be comfortable participating in the meeting, but perhaps you're consulting with them beforehand. You're asking them about what are their favorite parts of the school day, what do they really enjoy, what would they like to work on at school, is there anything that they really wouldn't like to work on, etc. The teaching team can also do the same thing so that there's a good broad perspective. Other professionals such as speech, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, they can also be involved as well as needed. So if a child is working on speech goals, the speech therapist would be the one to determine what those goals would be, working in collaboration with everyone else, of course. So the classroom teacher works in collaboration with the resource teacher and the parents. So they need to ensure that they know what the goals are, that they're working on them day to day, and that they're collaborating in the development of those goals, and also work collaboratively with you as a parent. So the classroom teacher also ensures the strategies documented in the PLP are implemented. So if, for instance, your child requires an FM system, it's important that the classroom teacher wears the FM system in the classroom. He or she is responsible for evaluating the outcomes. So that would be ensuring that she's keeping appropriate documentation so that you know exactly where your child is in terms of their PLP goals. And then differentiates lessons. So as required throughout the classroom, when she's delivering a lesson, it's important that she's meeting the needs of students and differentiating, which means giving options and varying the level of instruction. So parents and guardians work in collaboration with the school team in the development of the PLP. You can also take responsibility for some of the outcomes that can be worked on at home. Some are easier to be worked on at school, particularly if they're academic goals, if they're, say, math goals that are more complex. Perhaps those are to be worked on at school, but there's lots of other ones, as I mentioned earlier, about counting that can be worked on at home. Recognizing letters, sorting things, we can work on those sorts of things at home very easily. Communicate effectively with the school and the classroom teacher. So it's important that we have a collaborative relationship with them and that we're communicating effectively. So we're sharing exactly what we want and what we need. And if there's any concerns that you may have, that we're letting them know in a very effective manner. And it's important that you also share knowledge on your child and his or her exceptionality. So that could be if there's any changes, perhaps there's going to be a change in routine that's going to perhaps impact your child, perhaps there's a change in medication, perhaps as a parent you're going away for work for a few days and you think that may affect your child at school. It's important that you communicate all of that with the classroom teacher. So as I mentioned throughout most of the PowerPoint, the word collaboration comes up repeatedly, and it's because collaboration really is key. We need to ensure that as parents we're working collaboratively with the school, that we're viewing them as partners, and that we're sharing the information that they need to do their job and to work effectively with our child. So a good PLP is a result of collaboration, consultation, and teamwork. So we need to collaborate with everyone involved. We need to consult with those who are the experts in those fields, and we need to work as a team. A good PLP keeps in mind the philosophy of inclusion. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between accommodations and modifications. So some students may be accommodated and other students may be modified. And we also have students who are individualized, but I'll touch on that a bit later. So if a student is accommodated, that means that it enables a student to reach the outcome without changing the subject area or target skill. Curriculum outcomes and grade levels are not altered. For example, an accommodation would be wearing a pair of glasses. You're not able to see any better than someone who can see 20/20, but you're able to see the same. So you're just receiving the support that you need, but you're not getting an advantage over somebody else. When accommodations are not sufficient to meet the student's needs, then we look at modifications. So modifications are to address the specific needs of the student, and grade level curriculum outcomes of a subject area have been changed or altered and simplified. So we're not working on the same thing. However, it's still based on regular curriculum. So for example, perhaps the class is working on double-digit multiplication, so 20 times 52. Your child is working on repeated addition, so 2 plus 2 plus 2, or perhaps they're working on a multiplication from 0 to 5. For instance, we're changing what the expectation is for that child, but it's still based on curriculum. So here are some examples of accommodations. I'll just read a few. So provide larger print. The child's not able to get an advantage over the assignment by having larger print. It's just helping them see it better. Provide a designated reader. Allow for verbal responses. Provide preferential seating. So some students need to be seated closer to the door, perhaps up front or perhaps away from the window. So taking that into consideration. Provide a space with minimal distractions. Allow frequent breaks. Administer a test at a specific time of day. So we're not giving them any additional support. We're just giving them the support that they need to do the regular curriculum. So here are some examples of modifications. So if a student is required to do an outline instead of an essay for a project, perhaps they have picture communication symbol choices on their test. They may have a word bank of choices for answers to test questions, and that would be if everyone else is not provided with the word bank. Use a calculator on the math test. So again, if a calculator is not allowed, but your child is able to use a calculator, that would be a modification. Questions reworded using simpler language. Projects submitted for written report. So if a student is required to do a written report, perhaps of a novel study, but your child is going to do a project instead, that would be a modification. So we also have individualized plans. So an individualized plan is needed in a minority of cases. It deviates from the regular curriculum. So the goals that are being worked on, you would not be able to find them in the curriculum. So the student is not expected to achieve many or any of the outcomes of the grade level curriculum. It will involve planning in areas other than educational outcomes. So it could be speech, occupational therapy. For instance, a goal could be working on feeding. It could be working on toileting. It could be working on a walking program. Those are not educational goals, but it's necessary for an individual child. So that even if your child is on an individualized plan, it is the expectation that they are included in the classroom themes and activities as much as possible. So maybe your child is working on individual goals for part of the day. It's important that he or she is part of the class and is working on being included as much as possible. So it's important to note that the decision for placement of a student lies with the educators. So if the educators decide that they would like to put your child on a PLP, it is their decision to make, but as a parent, you can request a formal appeal if you do not agree. So if you don't feel that it's an appropriate fit for your child, you can appeal. So goals and measurable outcomes. Every PLP should contain goals and measurable outcomes. So we're going to talk about what the difference is between goals and measurable outcomes. So goals are the end point of an intervention, something a student is expected to achieve over a specific period of time. Measurable outcomes assist the student in progressing towards a goal in the PLP. They are steps that lead to a goal. So, for example, the goal is to improve social and communication skills. So it's quite broad. It's a statement. That's what we would like, but we don't really know how we're going to get there. So then we have measurable outcomes. So we have 3 different measurable outcomes for this child. So Jill will say good morning to the teacher with a prompt 100% of the time. Jill will play with her peers during recess with prompt 80% of the time. And during free play, Jill will say hello to her classmates with prompts 100% of the time. So as you notice, we have different percentages in here. We have 80% because for this specific time frame, that's what our outcome is. So we start off at 80%. Next time, we may change the goal and change it to 90%, and then eventually we'll get to 100%. But we want to make sure that it's realistic and attainable. So reviewing the PLP. The school-based team should review the goals and outcomes of the PLP to make sure it's successful, and that should be done fairly regularly. Changes or accommodations should be made if needed. At the end of the year, transition planning should occur. So if your child has a PLP, it's important that the transition happens before the end of June, before we leave on summer vacation. Sometimes we have transition planning that happens the first week back to school, which is okay too, but it's important that you have a date set prior to the end of the school year. And at that transition planning meeting, you should be meeting with the resource teacher for the next year, the classroom teacher if it's determined, the school administrator, whoever is part of the team. And the student should receive a report card whether they are receiving accommodations or in a modified or individualized plan. So regardless of the plan that your child is on, he or she should still be receiving a report card with all the other students. So transition. It's important to start thinking about transition to adult life early on with students who have a disability. This should be included in the PLP. So as early as grade 8 or 9, it's important that we start thinking about transition planning. And it's important to involve outside agencies, community members, post-secondary institutions, and others, as they will be key in providing support to the student. So we need to involve as many people as we possibly can to ensure that your child has the best transition plan possible. When transitioning from one school to the next, PLPs should be passed on to the next school, and a meeting should be scheduled for both schools and parents to meet to discuss. So when you're transitioning, whether it's because you're moving and changing schools, or if it's a natural transition between grade 5 and grade 6, for instance, it's important that the schools meet and that they discuss your child, what was successful, and what is in their PLP and where they are in terms of those goals. So sometimes throughout this process you may have some questions, concerns, or issues. It's important that you always start off with the classroom teacher. If you're not successful in getting your issue resolved, then you would go to the resource teacher and then the principal. So it's important that you go through the steps at the school level. If your issue is still not resolved at that point, you can go to the district office. At the district office, there are different levels to go to as well. So we have education support services coordinators at the districts, and then we have the director of student services, and then we have the superintendent. So we have different levels at the district office as well. And then if you're still not successful, then we also have individuals at the Department of Education that can help. So remember to bring someone with you if you need support. And that is if you're going to a PLP meeting, if you're going to a meeting where you do have an issue, whatever your meeting is about, you do have a right to bring someone with you. And that person can be there for moral support. They can take notes for you. They can be there to discuss what was discussed in the meeting, just so that it's clear in your mind who said what and why they said what they did and that sort of thing. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach us. Our number is there on the screen, but I'll say it for you just in case. It's 1-866-622-2548. You can also like us on Facebook. We have lots of different events going on, and they're always posted on our Facebook page and also on our Twitter page as well. So if you'd like to know more about us and be involved in our events, please feel free to like us and follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much and have a great day.